I swear this is like my 5th take. As every time I go to even start, I hear noises outside and it just distracts me. I'm like, ooh, what's that? Gotta learn to tone it down. Yeah, I don't know what this is. Anyway, so I've been thinking of doing a video lately, kind of explaining the process of me making these images that I've been making. Now, I'm going to show using a program called Paint.net. The wonderful thing about this program is it's like a paint program. It's free to download for Windows users. Mac users can go fuck themselves. But it's like Paint, except it's got a couple tools that are quite useful to me, but it's also got layers, allowing me to edit individual layers of a image, you know, as if they were separate images easily, and then merge them down at the end when I need them to. This makes it very easy to align things without permanently fucking things up. I can imagine if you were trying to do all of this in normal Microsoft Paint, then you would have a very hard time because of that reason. Because if you made a mistake and you kind of confirmed it, you kind of bone yourself. Anyway, so my process of making these things definitely starts with what image I use. It doesn't start with an idea, it starts with an image. Because when I look at an image like this, it's actually very hard to work with an image that has gradients like this, shadows all over the place, because you'd have to kind of like, if I'm trying to remove certain features and get them out of the way so that I can put new ones in, then it becomes rather difficult to just kind of make it disappear. I'd have to like scribble all of this with white, and you'd lose a lot of quality with it. If everything else kind of around it looks a lot detailed, and you just got this white blob. No. I definitely prefer to use images such as this. Almost everything is a solid color. Of course, there is a couple of shadows here and those, but those aren't a big of a deal to work with. So I open this up in Paint.net. I'll leave a link in the description of the program I use. This is Paint.net. You couldn't tell. But I open up this image, and I decide what I want to do with it. So I'm going to explain the process of what I went through, where I made the kind of smug avatars that I've been going around posting. I've decided to use this as an example because it's a fairly easy one. But first, let me go give a very basic overview of the tools. Rectangular select. You select. Very simple. If you want to crop to selection, just go under image and then crop to selection. If you want to undo, Control Z, just like every other program. Very simple stuff. The thing about selection to note is that if you want to make changes, it'll only affect within the selected area, which is very useful if you are trying to do any precise work. Very useful. You've got lasso select, which is basically if you have a very weird shape and you want to select it, you kind of draw around it. And it makes a freeform shape using what you did. Which is useful for very weird shapes. There's elliptical select, which is something I barely ever use because almost nothing is ever a basic circle. But you start at the top left corner, I believe. And not exactly. It's a little tricky. You definitely want to. Okay, so it starts within the pixel that you select, and you just drag it to the bottom right, and it makes a circle that kind of has the same x and y width and length. You don't start from the center. And probably the most useful select tool is the magic wand tool. This is like an automatic lasso tool. It works by the color. If you select a certain pixel, it will select every pixel around it that has a similar color, which is dictated by your tolerance. You could slide this left and right to kind of see how it'll affect everything. The higher tolerance, the more lenient it will be when it tries to select. You definitely don't want the tolerance to always be at 100. You want the tolerance to only select what you want. Again, selecting is very useful if you only want to edit a specific area. But it also works with some of the tools. The move tool moves selected pixels around everything you have selected to the specified area. So if you wanted to like move it around, you can. Once you move it around, you can see these little buttons here. You can shape it. If you kind of hover over around the edges of the region, you can rotate it. This little thing right here specifies the kind of the axis, the point at which everything rotates. And if you want to move everything but keep the same size ratio, you hold shift while you do these. Doesn't matter which one of these you select. If you just hold shift. If you hold shift while rotating, it'll snap. So if you just shit. And if you want to deselect, you could you hit Control D, by the way. Forgot to mention that. If you want to select multiple regions, you can hold shift and it'll add a region. Of course, the tolerance selects all regions. It's probably be easier to demonstrate with a select tool. Hold shift, you can select and hold control, and you can add regions. Hold alt, you can remove them. Very useful if you. It's useful in certain situations, but it's good to have. This move selection only moves the box in which the box of selection. It's very strange. If you wanted to like move this around, I guess. It's got the same properties as the move tool, except it only moves the selection itself rather than the selected area. The magnifying tool is very useless. It left click to zoom in, right click to zoom out, but you can do the same thing with Control minus and Control plus. Pan tool, you can, if you're zoomed in, you can move around, but at the same time, you could just pan around. And now we get to the drawing tools. Sorry, I'm not good with transitions. Paint bucket tool is obvious. If you use this color palette right here, you left click to select what primary color you want. You can also select a secondary color by using this drop down box. Secondary colors, if you left click, you use the primary color. If you right click, use the secondary color. The tolerance up here is similar to the magic wand tool. Selects based off of color. paintbrush tool. It's basically your standard paintbrush. You can drag it around, left click, and use the primary color. Right click, use the secondary color. Hardness, kind of, if you see these edges, how they're kind of transparent, that's what hardness does. Set it at 100 and it's just a blop. Set it at 0 and it's just very, very smooth. This is setting hardness is useful if you're working around edges and don't want to screw things up, because if you have you can see which one whoops, that's what the undo is for, which one looks a little nicer. It just depends on what you're doing. If you want to undo and undo, by the way, there's a redo button. Control Y. Erase tool just erases whatever you have. Same concept as the paints, as the little paintbrush tool, except it basically removes pixels entirely instead of changing them into a different color. Pencil is just a 1 pixel wide, hardness 100 paintbrush, kind of. I guess you can use it for certain drawing scenarios, but for our purposes, it's not very useful. We have the color picker. Left click to change the primary color. Right click to change the secondary color, which is very nice if you're trying to grab a color. Color chain recolor tool. Very interesting tool. What this does is if you want to change a part of a drawing into a different color, you would choose the primary color. The hardness is the same as all of the other tools, basically how it handles the edges. Tolerance is the tool won't do anything if the color is too different for ease of use. And you can change the color. This is more useful if you have more detailed images and are trying to change the color. You can see it a lot more than if you use this directly. This just looks like a paintbrush, but if you use it here and you have areas of slightly different varying color, like shades and stuff, you can see how it affects things, I guess. Affects different colors if you've got this white area with a shade, it'll maintain the same shading. The tolerances is definitely something to mess around with. It's difficult to get it right. If you remember that it samples what was there when you first hit the mouse button. So you can hover over and screw around over the same spot over and over all you want, but if you let go and press it down again, especially with certain circumstances, it'll really screw up what you're doing. It also matters where you initially start. If you hit this darker area, it does. I've got something selected. Then set the tolerance a little higher. It'll produce a different result than if you selected it. Occasionally, yeah, you can see a little small difference, but sometimes the difference is noticeable with different combinations, especially if you've got different colors like this that have different saturations. Very strange tool. There's also this option right here, which will, instead of sampling where you've got selected, it'll sample from your secondary color, which produces some different results. This is also pretty neat, depending on what you need. It also somewhat samples from what you've got around you, which you can see if. Anyway, you've also got your standard text tool. Click, type, change the options. It uses your primary color. change the font size, alignment, and then you hit finish when you're done. I recommend putting text on a separate layer, which I'll show you how to do later. Line tool, pretty nice. You can draw a straight line like this. It'll use the brush width. You can use these to kind of curve the lines a little bit. It's a pretty neat tool depending on what you're doing. Shape tool. Make shapes. Come up here, select the shape you want, draw it. You can select how you want the fill to be, which you have to select over here. Select color. You do this. This uses your secondary color. It all depends on the kind of the style you want. Again, if you want to do fancy stuff like that, you could select using the magic wand tool. Do this, and then you've got a very interesting edit. It's fun to mess around with what you could do. And the last thing, the gradient tool is definitely something you always want to use in combination with a selection tool. What it does is if you up here select the type of gradient you want, it matters what your primary and secondary color are, and then drag 2 points around, you can make fancy gradients with them. Each gradient also has some repeat options, which if you want this spiral and select repeat, then you get a repeating spiral. I'm sure there's a small difference between warped and reflected, which it seems to be how smooth it is. It all depends on the situation, I guess. Oh wow. Anyway. And that's pretty much it for the tools. Now, say if I wanted to do a face swap, which is a very simple thing to do with this, I would probably want to use the color picker to select the picker. And since this is just a solid color, I could just go ahead and use a paintbrush and color right over it. Right over everything. Very simple. It always depends on your source image. Basically, the more solid the image color, the solid... Jesus Christ, I can't speak. The more solid the color is, the easier it is. So step one is always to prepare the image, the source image for whatever you're trying to do. In this case, it is delete the face. Now you've got no face over here. Very strange, but... I just want to demonstrate the layer tool real quick. The layers real quick. If you click this button down here, you can add a new layer, delete them, duplicate them, merge them down, which means basically like make them into one layer. So you can't edit them separately anymore. But if you want to save as a normal image, you have to merge all the layers down first. Otherwise, you won't be able to do it unless you're saving something like a TIFF file. You can also rename them if you wanted to. It depends on really how intense your edit is. If you have several layers, you might want to edit them. But basically, you could just draw in this layer. Choose a color. But it doesn't affect the layer below it. You could do whatever you want to this layer, and it does not touch the layer before it until you merge them down. And then they become one layer. What you can do is you can drag an image on top and hit add layer. So now all of a sudden you have two images on two separate layers in which you can edit separately. You can do whatever you want with this. So what I want to do is I want to get, first of all, get rid of this yellow. I want to set the tolerance to a good amount so that it covers everything I want to, but not what I don't want it to. So I definitely don't want it to select the actual face itself and delete. Now, sometimes with the magic wand tool, you have to pay attention to any missing particles, because if you do here, set it too low and delete, you can see how it leaves pixels behind. But if you set it where you can kind of see them, you just have to be careful. Oh. And now this brown color is very weird, so I'll just use the paint bucket tool and make them black. Also kind of adds a little shadow effect to them, which is nice. That's probably tolerance that's setting that. Anyway, now I can select these. Oh, again with the pixels, I think you can still kind of see. This is definitely why I have to render this in 1080p, because you would never be able to see those tiny little pixels otherwise. So you just I'll just select this, kind of make this fit this to the size I want it to. Now obviously, as you can see, this doesn't really fit exactly the way I want it to, so I will select each whole thing individually and move them where I want them to. And there we have it. So you should probably not select. I think with the select and move tools, it seems to like to sample from the layer below it. This is a very strange thing I've noticed. You just have to kind of be careful with this. I'm not sure why it does that. But then you have your very simple face swap. This is the same method I used to make the memes, except the face swap memes that I made during the contest. Although I had to use a little trick to them, if you remember. I'll show you how I did that real quick. It's kind of interesting. So instead of deleting layer, it has to do with how you mess around with the layer. It's how the layers work. So if, let's say, I want to do this, you can make the layers invisible, but as long as you've got the layer selected, you're still only affecting that layer. So you can kind of see the layer below it without having to interfere with the layer above it, as long as you've got the right layer selected. Now you can still mess around with the layer and it will still make changes. You just won't be able to see them. Now, using this trick, I will align the face to where I want this. I don't want the mouth to be above the bow, so I will select the right layer. It's a very poor image to sample, but I just wanted to show you how I did it last time. So I will hide this layer and say I wanted to select the face. So I'll use the magic wand tool, and if I select this layer above it, you can see that I can make changes to everything without having to worry about it. Now, I believe there should be an invert. So yeah, under Edit, you can hit Invert Selection and say I just wanted to just delete all of this, just erase it. And just like that, I have my face swap. It's the method I did when I did my funny edits from last time. Really what you do is you kind of mess around with everything a little bit. You kind of get an image that you can easily work with and see where your mind takes you. kind of saw this image, these two images right next to each other, and I just saw where it took me. There are a lot of edits that you haven't seen that while I was making them I realized how difficult they were, or it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, or something like that. But really, you shouldn't concern yourself of how good you think it's going to do. You should only concern yourself with how well, like, at the end you should decide that. Or if it's not turning out while you're doing it, it's a learning experience. So you just hit this button to merge the layers down while you have the top layer selected, and you save as another image. Preferably you want to don't make the same mistake I did and want to save it as a copy so that you still have the original image. See, you have an image you could just share over Discord. Why you would want to share this particular image, I don't know. This kind of doesn't work. But I just wanted to show you what I did to make the last images I did. If you can see these, that's how I made these. It's made how I made this. You just gotta mess around with it. You just gotta kind of have to have fun. I hope you found this at least a little useful. And I'd actually kind of like to see what you guys make of this. I'm not sure how other people have made theirs in the past, but who knows? This has been Internode, and I'll see you next time.